Hi, it's Beefy. I hope all is good in your neck of the woods. Today I want to show you how I built one of my ball machines. I've seen a few of these on Instagram and I was inspired to build one of my own. There's some really clever animations out there and it does make you think, how on earth did they do that? I built a couple of ball machines, both slightly different, but they were of the same principle. Basically we're tricking the viewer that it's one simple motion, where in fact there are parts that work together, and I made mine out of 4 simple things: nulls, splines, sweeps and primitives. Working out how to build a ball machine isn't easy, but I love a puzzle. Having an idea of the outcome helps. Originally I started by animating the ball in the way I wanted and built the machine up from there. In my original prototype, my object manager was a complete mess. There was a lot of experimentation, but once I honed the technique I got a real understanding of how to do this, and I applied the technique to another ball machine. It's really important to be really organised from the get-go, and learning how to recycle parts will help keep your hierarchy and your object manager stay organised. And the beauty of building one of these is, you only do half the work by building half the machine, and copying that to create the second half. There are many ways to skin a cat, and I'm going to show you how I built mine. There may be a better way, but once you have an understanding of how it works, you can experiment and play around with the idea. In the last tutorial, I showed you how to animate a ball along the surface of the Penrose triangle we built. In this tutorial, we'll be using the same calculation, but for this animation we need to make the ball loop seamlessly. So I will show you things you need to take into consideration to make this happen. You don't need to watch the previous tutorials to follow along, but if you haven't watched them yet, you can do so after this tutorial. They're fun to make. Before we crack on, I would like to welcome new viewers. If this is your first time here, then this is a place where I post tutorials, tips and other stuff. I'm just sharing some of the knowledge I picked up along the way. Hopefully it will help you in the future. So if you're into Cinema 4D and the like, then why not subscribe and tinkle that notification bell so you'll be notified when I post new content. You have nothing to lose. And a big shout out for everyone who's subscribed and liked my videos. You guys are awesome. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so I just jumped into Cinema 4D and I'm using Cinema 4D R25. You can use any version to follow along with this tutorial in this part and the next part. So in this part of the tutorial, I'm just going to go through how to work out the rotational values of the ball as we animate it around the spline here. So this is pretty much the same setup we're going to have in the next part of the tutorial, and this is pretty basic to what we're going to build in the next part. So I'm just going to go through some things first. I'm just going to press Ctrl D, bring up my project settings. So I'm working in 30 frames per second as I always do. And my project time is 0 to 360. And I set the preview to 359. And the reason why I set that to 359 is so that I can get a seamless loop of our ball as it moves around the spline here. So if we come to frame 0, and we come to frame 360, these 2 frames are exactly the same, so we don't need to play them twice. If we do, then we're going to get a little stutter or slippage of the ball as it animates around. So I just set my preview to 359, but all my keyframes are going to be set to frame 360. So I have 3 examples here. I'm just going to go through these one by one, but the setup is pretty much the same with each one here. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. So I have my circle spline, and this is the radius of 200. I made the plane XZ, and the number of intermediate points I made 64, so we get a smooth rotation. So aligned to the spline I have a null, and I've called this ball control, and I have the sphere as a child of this null. So I've applied a align to spline tag, and I've keyframed the position here. So it's going to animate around like so. And also I made sure that I have tangential checked as well. So this will ensure that the null is going to be rotating along the spline instead of keeping the orientation all the way around. So the Z axis is always going to be facing the front there. And my sphere is 20 centimeters in radius, and I have 64 segments just to smooth that out. I just kept the type to standard. Self-explanatory there. And I've applied the material to our sphere. So if I'm in the top view at the moment, I'm just going to come to the display and just say ground shading, so we can see our ball clearly there. So as we animate round, we can see the ball. So this material I've applied to the sphere is a simple Cinema 4D material. In the color channel, I just piped in a checkerboard, and you can find that just coming to the drop down menu here in the texture, come to surfaces and then checkerboard. And this checkerboard, I made the frequency on the U0 and V1, so we get this contrasty white and black ball there, so it's easy for us to see how this ball is animating. So the reason why I put this ball in the null is that we can actually have more control over our animation here. With this sphere here selected, I can come to the coordinates and I can just now keyframe my rotation without having to worry about any anomalies when we animate our ball around. So it just helps our animations. So we have the align to spline tag on the null, and then we can rotate the sphere as it animates around. Now what we're going to do is we're going to work out the rotational value of our ball so that it rotates seamlessly around this spline here. So we need to work out the frequency of this ball moving around this spline. So the speed of everything is set by our keyframes here. So we can set our keyframes down to 0 to 180 if we want to. But the rotational frequency of the ball is going to be exactly the same. So we know the ball rotates at 360 degrees. We need to find out the distance of one rotation there. Now, if you watched the last tutorial, we actually did the same thing, but we just animated along a spline from point A to point B. This is the closed spline, so this is going to be different to the last tutorial. But there's things that we need to take into consideration. And one of the things that we need to take into consideration is that we need to have a whole number of the frequency. So how many times this ball is going to rotate around this circle. It's going to be like 8, 7, or whatever it is, depending on the circumference of this ball. But we have to make sure that we have a whole number so that we can loop seamlessly. So to work this out, we need to use a little bit of math. And to find out the circumference of the ball, we need to times the diameter by pi, and pi is 3.14. But also we need to work out the circumference of this circle spline as well. So let's work out the spline first. And it's always best to use the radius or diameter of the circle to work out the circumference. And I shall explain why in a moment. Okay, so this circle is 200 centimeters in radius, which is the center point to any point on the circumference there. To find out the diameter, we need to times the radius by 2, which is 400. Now, if we times 400 by 3.14, we get a value of 1256 centimeters, 1256 centimeters. So that is exactly the distance around this spline. If I just copy this spline out, I'm just going to hold Control and drag that out. I'm just going to hide the example for the moment. And I'm just going to make this circle editable. So I'm going to press C. And now this is editable. So we don't have any values of the radius or the diameter there. So in the last tutorial, I showed you how to find out the length of a spline. So we come to the mode here, we come to project info. And if you come to structure, we get the spline length. So if we have a straight spline going from point A to point B, this number is going to be correct. But with a circle, you can see that the spline length is 1257.126. We just worked that out to be 1256 centimeters. So this figure is completely wrong. So when you're creating your circle and you need to make it editable and you need to find out the distance of that spline, make note of the radius and diameter, and then you can work out the actual circumference of that circle. If you go by this figure here, this is going to be completely wrong. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that there. I'm going to turn our example back on. So we now know the circumference of the circle, which is 1256. So we need to work out the circumference of the ball now. And if we come to the sphere, the radius is 20. So the diameter is going to be 40. And we times that by 3.14. That's going to give us a value of 125.6 centimeters. So I'm just going to make a note of that as well. Now, if you look at these two numbers, 1256 and 125.6, is using the same numbers in that figure. So just by looking at that, we can easily see that the circumference is going to be easily divisible by the circumference of the ball. So if we divide the circumference by the circumference of the ball, we're going to get 10 rotations. So I'll come back to frame 0 here, and I'll come to the ball. We're going to rotate this ball on the P here. So I'm going to put 0 in the first frame, set a keyframe, and I'm going to come to the last frame, 360. So I'm going to make sure that I am on 360 there. And I'm just going to come into the same rotation here. I'm going to put minus 360 because we're going to be rotating into the negative, and I'm going to times that by 10. And now we have our ball animating around. So if you look at the beginning there, we had that slip, and now it's speeding up really fast. We need to make sure that this is linear. So I've already got my dope sheet here docked into my interface. But if you're using another version of Cinema 4D, you can right click here, come to animation, show F curve, and then that's going to bring up your F curve so you can easily change your keyframes to linear. Okay, so I'm just going to, I've got other splines in here showing, this is for the other examples here, but I need the sphere example 1. I'm going to select both these keyframes and I'm going to make this linear. So now this ball is animating around like so. There's no slippage. It's looking pretty good. And it loops perfectly. Okay, so if you, let's just close that for the moment. So that's example 1, that's easy. When I'm creating an animation and I want to animate a sphere around a closed spline, I try to keep everything as default here. So the radius is 200 and the ball is going to be like 20, which is 1/10 of the circle radius there. So I know that this is going to be easy to work out, but in some examples you're going to have a different animation, and I'm going to keep this circle spline the same, which is 200 centimeters, but this ball here is going to be 30 centimeters. So I'm going to close the example 1 down. I'm going to open example 2. So example 2, we're going to do the same thing. We already know the circumference of the circle, which is 1256 centimeters. We just need to work out the circumference of the ball here. So this sphere is 30 centimeters. The diameter is going to be 60 centimeters, and we need to times that by pi, which is 3.14, and that's going to give us a value of 188.40. And already just by looking at that, we can see that isn't going to divide correctly into the circumference of the circle spline. So if we divide the circumference of the circle spline, 1256 by 188.4, we're going to get a rotational frequency of 6.66666666667. And that's not going to be good for us because we need to have a whole number. So let's just pop that into here and see what happens. So I'm going to rotate the P here. So I'm going to come back to frame 0. I'm going to set a keyframe here. Come to frame 360 minus 360 because we're animating into the negative there. And I'm going to times that by 6.667 because we can only go up to 3 decimal points in the fields here, and that's going to give us a value of minus 2400.12. Okay, I'm going to set a keyframe here and I'm just going to make these linear. and I'm going to deselect this, and then I'm going to play this and we're going to have a look, and it looks like it's rotating okay. There's no slippage there, but when we get to the loop point, there's a jitter there. It jumps. So we can't use 6.666667 as the rotational frequency of the sphere here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come to example 3. Same setup. This time we're going to work out what the circumference of the ball is going to be. So I'm going to work backwards this time. So my circle is the same. Just turn this on. My circle is the same, and that's 1256 centimeters, 1256 centimeters. That value we've already established, and we need to work out what the circumference of the sphere is. So I want to keep my ball around the same value of this sphere here. So this is 30 centimeters in radius. I want to make this ball as close as possible to that. So I did a little bit of working out, and the rotational frequency I want to have is 7. So what I need to do is I need to take the circumference of this circle and I need to divide that by 7. So that's going to give us a value of 179.428571. So that's going to be the circumference of our sphere here. So now we need to find out what the radius is going to be, so we can set the parameter here in the radius. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 179.428571, which is the circumference of the sphere. I'm going to divide it by 3.14, which is pi. And that's going to give us a diameter of 57.14288571. And if I divide that by 2, we're going to get a radius of 28.5714286. So I can only put in 3 decimal points in our field here. So I'm just going to put in 28.571, and that's going to be our radius of our ball here. All the numbers, all the figures after, all the decimal points after the 571, that's going to be really minuscule. We're not going to see much difference in the rotation of the sphere, but we just have to make sure that we set the rotational frequency of this ball as 7. So I'm just going to come into the coordinates here. I'm going to make sure I'm in frame 0. And I'm going to set a keyframe for frame 0 there. And I'm going to come to frame 360. And I'm going to say minus 360 times 7. So that gives a rotational value of minus 2520. And I'm going to come to my dope sheet again, and I'm going to make that linear. I'll close that again. So now if I play, that's looping perfectly around our spline there. So that's how you work out the rotational values of the sphere, and you can work this backwards to find out what the circumference of the ball is going to be if you know that you want this to be rotating around a certain number of times. So that's all fairly simple there, and I hope that all made sense. And what we're going to do now is I'm just going to crack on to the next part of the tutorial. We're going to be creating the ball machine. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to be using example 3 for our ball rotation. So our sphere is a radius of 28.571 and it has a rotational frequency of 7. So I'm going to be using this in the next part of the tutorial, so we don't need to work this out. Okay, we've already done that here. We've done our homework. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into the next part of the tutorial. Okay, so I've just opened up a new project here. It's a blank project and my frames per second is 30, and my timeline at the moment is 90 frames. I'm going to change this to 360. And I'm going to leave that as it is for the moment. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to build the ball machine. So I'm just going to build the first half, the bottom half of this machine. So then I'm going to be copying and duplicating that part of the machine. So we're going to do all the work in the bottom half, and that's the beauty of creating something like this. So it just cuts down a lot of time. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to create a null. So this null is going to be the parent of the whole machine. So I'm going to call this ball machine. We're going to be naming most of the parts of this machine here. So just be prepared. We need to stay organized. We need to actually recognize where we are in this hierarchy here. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a circle spline. And this circle spline, I'm going to leave the radius as 200. I'm going to set the plane to XZ. And I'm going to keep the intermediate points as uniform. And I'm going to say that this is 64. And this is going to give us a nice smooth rotation of this spline here. So I'm going to drop that in our hierarchy here. So that's now a child of our ball machine. And I'm going to call this main track. Okay, so now I'll need to add another null, and this null is going to be a child of the ball machine, and I'm going to call this bottom half. So this is the half of the machine that we're going to be working on. I'm going to take this main track here and I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to hold down Control and drag, and I'm going to make that a child of our bottom half null, and I'm going to change the name to bottom track. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a sweep around here. So I'm going to drop a sweep into our scene here, and I'm going to call this sweep bottom sweep. And then I'm going to drop that into my bottom half null, and I need something to sweep around this spline here, so I'm just going to create another circle. And I'm going to set the radius to 30. So this is going to accommodate our ball. And we've already worked out the value of our radius for the ball, which is going to be 28.571, because we need to have exactly 7 rotations around this spline here. So a radius of 30 is going to be fine. So I'm just going to call this bottom circle. I can't think of any other name for it. So I'm just going to take this, and this I'm going to keep the plane as XY, and the intermediate points I'm going to keep as uniform. Raise this number up a little bit. I'm going to say like 32 and see how we do with that. So I'm just going to drop this into our sweep here, and I'm just going to take these two, the bottom circle and the bottom track, and in that order I'm just going to drop that into the sweep. So now we have our tube that goes around our spline. Now in the bottom sweep here, I just want to take off banking, and the caps, I'm just going to remove the caps, and then I'm just going to change the end growth here. I'm going to change that to 50. So we have half of our tube there. So we don't have our caps now, which is pretty cool. And we should have a perfect sweep around our spline there. So let's bring our sphere in. I'm just going to bring our sphere in here, and I'm just going to call this bottom ball. And now with the bottom ball selected, I'm going to press Alt G and create a null, and I'm going to call this bottom ball control. So that ball is the child of this null here. And I'm just going to take this, I'm going to close this one up here, and I'm just going to bring this underneath our sweep. I'm going to be using this bottom track spline to align our ball. So I'm just going to recycle it. It just keeps everything a little bit more tidy in my hierarchy here. So first I'm going to take the ball or the sphere and I'm just going to change the radius to 28.571. That's the figure that we worked out there, and this is going to be, so I'm going to change the segments to 64 and I'm going to keep the type to standard. It doesn't really matter at this stage. And I'm just going to select the ball control, right click, come to animation, and I'm going to create a line to spline. And this align to spline tag needs a path, so I'm just going to drop the bottom track spline into our path here, and now we have that aligned at the start point there. So this is going to animate around like so. I'm going to make sure that I have tangential checked. If I just come to the top view here, and with the null selected, if I just move the position there, you can see that the orientation of the null doesn't change, and that's going to cause us some problems. We need this null to be following the path here, so I'm just going to make sure tangential is checked, and now this is going to rotate accordingly. Okay, so I'm just going to come back to our default view here, and actually I'm just going to come to the top view and we're going to have a look here, and you can see that this is the ball and this is our sweep here, and this is going to be a perfect fit for us. We're not going to have any intersection there, which is looking pretty cool there. Okay, so let's just come back to our default view here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the bottom sweep here. I want to add some thickness to this. So I'm just going to make sure I have the bottom sweep selected. And I'm just going to come to my drop down menu here, and I'm going to add a cloth surface. Hold down Alt, and then that makes it a parent of our sweep there. And I don't want to add any more subdivisions, so I'm just going to say 0 there. But the thickness I want to make 2. So now we get this thickness of our sweep there. So that when we add some specular material now, it's going to act like glass. There's some actual depth and dimension to this sweep. So we're going to get some nice refractions, etc. So I'm just going to change the name of this to bottom cloth surface. And now I'm going to put all this here in a null. So with the bottom cloth surface selected, I'm just going to say Alt G, and I'm just going to call this bottom sweep control. Okay, so we can now manipulate the position or rotational value of this now. And I'm just going to make sure that my bottom ball control here is actually in the hierarchy there. I'm just going to change this to sweep. That's annoying me. It's my fat fingers, they don't work sometimes. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do the rotation of the ball here. I'm just going to come into my material editor here, and I'm just going to create a material, and I'm going to turn off the reflectance. This is a simple Cinema 4D material, and I'm just going to come down to surfaces, checkerboard, come into there, and I'm going to say 0 on the U frequency, and I'm going to say 1 on the V frequency. So we're going to get this contrasty white and black there. So that's going to help us observe the rotation of the ball, make sure that we got our animation correct. So I'm just going to drop that straight onto my ball. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to come to my cloth surface here. I'm just going to come to the basic tab, and I'm going to select X-ray so that we can see what's going on inside, so we can see the rotation of this ball. So first of all, I'm just going to set some keyframes for our align to spline here. So I'm going to come to frame 0, and I'm just going to select this, So I'm going to make a keyframe for frame 0 and come to frame 360, and I'm going to say 100% and set a keyframe. So we just come to the top view here, and in the top view here I'm just going to come to ground shading so we can see this a little bit better. So this ball is going to be animating around here. So we need to make sure that this is linear. We need to have a constant rate to make sure that this is looping correctly. So in other versions of Cinema 4D, just right click the position, come to animation, show F curve, and then you can set your keyframes to linear. That's if you haven't got linear set as default. So I'm just going to come to my dope sheet here, and I need to see both my keyframes, so I'm just going to press H. So that's going to frame all my keyframes for me in my port here. So and there's a line to spline here. I need to change the name of this. So I'm just going to come to the line to spline tag, because we're going to be manipulating other line to splines, and we need to make sure that we know what a line to spline is associated with here. So this is going to be, I'm going to say bottom ball control align to spline. Okay, so now we can see exactly what that align to spline is associated with. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I have my keyframe selected, and I'm going to say linear. I'm going to leave my dope sheet open here for a little bit, and now I'm going to set some rotational values for our bottom ball here. So I'm going to come back to frame 0, and I'm going to come into my coordinates, and I'm going to rotate this on the P. And as you can see, we're going to have to animate into the negative there. I'm going to set a keyframe for 0, and I'm going to come to frame 360, and I'm going to type in minus 360 because I know that one rotation of the ball is going to be 360 degrees, and I'm going to have a rotational frequency of 7. So times that by 7. So this gives me a value of minus 2520 degrees there. So I'm going to set a keyframe, and I'm just going to make sure I select both my keyframes here. So this is the bottom ball sphere, and I'm going to set that to linear. I'm going to close the dope sheet for the moment. I'm going to unselect this, and we're going to see how this animates. Okay, so you can see there that we have this little jump. And that's because we have 360 frames on our timeline here. This is exactly 12 seconds and 1 frame long. So if we come to the first frame and then come to the last frame, you can see that these are exactly the same. We don't need to repeat this frame twice. So I'm just going to change my preview to 359. I'm still going to set all my keyframes at this end at 360, but a preview is going to go up to 359 and loop back to 0. So let's just have a look here. Looks like it's animating okay. And that loops perfectly there. Okay, so we're nearly there now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some geometry to our construct here. So I'm going to add a couple of trims at this end, and I'm going to add a support in the middle here. And if I just come into our default view here, I'm going to bring in, just close this all up here. I'm going to bring in another primitive, and I'm going to bring in a tube. So I'm going to change some values of this tube. It's way too big. So I'm going to start with the inner radius. So we've become to our sweep here. And if I just select the bottom circle here, this is the radius of our sweep here. But also we added 2 centimeters of thickness. We need to make sure the inner radius is more than 32. So I'm going to say 32.5. We can make some adjustments if we need to, but I think that's going to be perfectly fine. And then on the outer radius, I'm going to say 34. And then I'm going to change the height to 5. And I'm going to increase the rotational segments to 64. And also I'm going to add a fillet. If we just come in here, we can see what we're doing here. Close that there. So I'm going to add a fillet, and this is too smooth for me. It looks okay, but I'm just going to say this is going to be 0.5. Just gives us a little bit more definition on the edge there. Let's just come back out of here again. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the tube name to trim. With the trim selected, I'm going to press Alt G, and I'm just going to call this trim control. Because we're going to be aligning the null to this spline, and I want to keep the trim free so that I can manipulate the position and rotation there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to close some of this up here. And I'm just going to create another null here. So with the bottom half selected, I'm going to press Shift and I'm going to add a null. So that's going to make that a child of our bottom half null there. And I'm just going to call this Geo. And I'm going to move this to the bottom of our hierarchy here. So everything, because I'm going to be using align to spline with this. So everything that's aligned to this spline is, I'm going to make sure that it's at the bottom of the hierarchy here, so that we can read the track first and then the line to spline. So we're going to get some perfect animation there. So now we're going to take this trim control and I'm going to drop that into our geo. And then I'm going to right click, come to animation, and I'm going to say line to spline. There's no need to change the name of this one because we're not animating it. So the spline path we're going to use, if I just come to the bottom sweep control null, twirl that down, I'm just going to use the bottom track. So I'm going to recycle this again, drop that in there. So now that's aligned to our spline there. So I'm going to close that again. And now I can just position this trim wherever I want. So I'm just going to change the orientation of our trim here. So I'm just going to say +Z. So now that's perfectly aligned. And also in the align to spline tag, I'm going to make sure I've got tangential checked. That's looking good there. So we've got enough space between this trim and the sweep there. So we're not going to get any intersections. We have to watch out for that because we're using a specular material. It's easy to see intersections with the specular. So, but when we're way out here with the camera, we're not going to see that gap. But if it's bothering you, you can actually make that a little bit smaller. But I think that's perfectly fine there. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to put this back to frame default. Okay, and I'm going to duplicate this trim and I'm going to put one at this end here. So I'm just going to hold control, drag that out, and I'm just going to call this trim control 2. And then I'm going to come to the line to spline tag of the trim control 2. I'm going to set the position to 50%. And now we've got one at this end of our geometry there. I'm going to create another one. I'm going to hold down Control and drag that out. And this one I'm going to call just so we know which one's which. So this is a middle support here. We can change that as well, but I'm just going to leave that as it is. And then I'm just going to come to the line to spline tag here, and I'm going to set the position to 25%. And I want to make this a little bit different to the end trims here. And if I could just come to the top view. This is going to be connected to the arm because I'm going to create a post and I'm going to create an arm. So this looks like it needs to hold this whole structure here. So I'm going to make this a little bit fatter and thicker. So I'm just going to come to the tube here and I'm just going to put the radius to 36. And then I'm just going to change the height to something like 12. And that's looking a little bit more sturdier there. We just come into the default view here. And that's looking good there. So again, when you do this, you have to make sure that we don't get any intersection with our tube, but these are figures that I've used before, so I know that this is going to be okay. And the other thing we need to do, we need to align these two end trims up. So we just come to the top view here. This is now protruding over the edge of our sweep there. So I just need to move this back a little bit. So this is why I put these into a null, is easier to control. So I need to change the value on Z. So I need to push this up a little bit. So I'm just going to say 2.5 because I know that the height of this tube is 5 centimeters. So I'm just going to say 2.5 there, and now that's perfectly aligned. Let's just come to the other one here and let's scroll that down, and I'm going to say minus 2.5. So now that's all aligned with our sweep there. So that's all looking pretty good. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to just close this up here. And I'm just going to create another null. So I'm just going to make sure that the geo null is selected. Hold down shift and I'm just going to create another null. So now this is a child of this. And I'm just going to call this the trim. And I'm just going to put these three in here. And then we can close this and it's going to make everything a little bit more tidier in our object manager here. So I'm just going to create another primitive here. So I'm going to create a cylinder and this is going to be bang smack in the middle of our bottom half here. And I'm just going to make some changes. I'm going to call this post. So I'm going to make some changes to the post here. So I'm going to come to the object manager. I'm going to say the radius is going to be 5. Maybe 6. It's got to look like it's got the girth to support everything here. So 6 is fine. I'm just going to come to the caps and just add a fillet. And I'm going to say 2. So let's just come to the default view here. And yeah, maybe I was just going to change the radius to 1. Yeah, so I have a bit more definition there. And also with the rotational segments, I'm just going to change that to 32 to smooth it out a little bit there. And I'm going to copy this post and I'm just going to control drag that down, and I'm going to call this arm. And I'm going to change the orientation of this arm. I'm going to say plus X. No, I'm not. I'm going to say plus Z. So that's in the right position now. So I'm going to come to the front view. No, I'm not. I'm going to come to the side view. There we go. We can see what we're doing here. I'm going to hide the sweep for the moment, so we can see what we're doing here. So we need to intersect this post, and we also need to intersect this support here on the sweep. So I'm just going to change some values of this arm. I'm going to say this is going to be 3. That's looking pretty good. And I'm just going to move this over like so. And then I'm just going to reduce the height and just put that into position here. I'm going to make sure that I'm only intersecting this outer circumference of our support here, and that we're not going to be intersecting into this inner radius here. Okay, so that's looking good there, and this is intersecting our post there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the post and I'm just going to bring that down to say round about there. That's looking good. And then I'm going to make the arm a child of the post. And then I'm just going to drop that into my geo null. And let's just come to our default view here and see what we built. And that's looking pretty good. So it's up to you. I mean, you can make this a little bit more detailed by adding some joins here, etc. Whatever you want to do is up to you. I'm just adding a very simple structure here because I don't want to be going into too much with this tutorial. I want to try and keep this as short as possible. But this is basically your geo here, so it's up to you how you're going to build that. So I'm just going to turn the sweep back on, and I'm going to come to the top view. So we have everything built that we need. So now we need to just align this bottom part of the machine up. So I'm just going to come to the bottom half null. I'm going to close that up there. So I'm just going to right click, come to animation and align to spline. And the spline that I want to align to is the main track here. So I'm just going to drop that in here. Now I'm going to leave tangential unchecked because I want this to keep the orientation that it has, but it's in the wrong place at the moment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to rotate this bottom half around so this is facing the right direction here. So I'm just going to rotate this around, hold down shift for increments, and I'm going to say 90 degrees there. And now I'm going to take the main track here and I'm just going to rotate this around 90 degrees. And now, so now when I play with the position here, the bottom half of the machine is rotating like so. So I'm going to set some keyframes for our animation here. So I'm just going to change the position to 50% because I want this arm here, the sweep, I want this to start in this position. So I'm going to come down to frame 0 and I'm just going to set a keyframe. So now I'm just going to bring my playhead down to frame 180 and I'm going to change the position to 0 and set a keyframe, and then I'm going to come down to frame 360. I'm just going to move my playhead right down to the end here, make sure I am on frame 360 because I have my preview range set to 359. So now I'm just going to move the position back to 50% and set a keyframe. So I'm just going to keep these keyframes as spline because I want it to move slowly, speed up, and then ease in to that position. So when we get to frame 180, this ball is going to disappear and the ball and the top half of the machine is going to take over. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is, now that I've got that set up, I'm going to create the top half of the machine. I think we built everything that we want to so far today. So we got our construct in here. So we have our post arm and the supports and trims there. That's all I'm going to be building today. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the bottom half here and I'm just going to control drag that out. And I'm just going to get rid of this 0.1 here. Now with this bottom half here, I'm just going to use the name tool. So I'm just going to open this up. I'm just going to right click and I'm going to say select children. So it's going to select everything here. So some of these are named bottom here. So I want to change this to top. It's the way I like to work here when I'm doing something like this. So with everything selected here, I'm just going to come to my tools, and in my tools I have my naming tool, and I think it's in a different place with other versions of Cinema 4D, maybe in character, I'm not too sure, but you can do the Shift C and do the search for it. But this is the naming tool. I'm going to select that and I'm just going to replace bottom underscore with top underscore, and everything with the bottom underscore is going to be renamed. So I'm just going to click replace name. So now we have our top underscore here now in this hierarchy. The thing we're going to have to do manually is the align to splines here. So I'm just going to select this align to spline and come to the basic here. I need to change this to top ball control. So now that we can see, if I just come into the dope sheet here, we now have top ball control aligned to spline as opposed to the bottom ball control aligned to spline. So we now know which align to spline is assigned to what, and also the splines that I created here. So this one for the bottom half, I'm just going to change the name of this one. Bottom half null. If I can get my fat fingers working. And also I'm just going to copy, actually I'm just going to copy the half null. Control C, just copy that. And then I'm going to come into the top half null, align to spline, and then I'm just going to paste this in. And I'm just going to call this top half. So this is the top half null aligned to spline. Okay, so now we can come into the dope sheet here. We can see exactly what's what. So I'm just going to close my dope sheet there. So I think I've got everything ready now. So what I'm going to do is get the top half into position here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the main track here and I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm just going to change the name from main track bottom. And the copy, I'm going to change to main track top. And now if I just come into the align to splines here, into the tag. So our bottom half is aligned to the main track bottom. And the top half is aligned to main track bottom as well. So I'm just going to take this main track top and just drop that into our field. And now I can just take this spline here and I can rotate this around. So now hold down shift with increments. That this half of the machine, the top half of the machine, is now separated from the bottom half here. And the other thing I need to do is I need to come into the top half here and I'm going to rotate this around like so. So hold down shift for increments. So this is minus 180. So now this is all lined up. So if I just press play, this is all lined up. So now we just got to do something with our balls, with our spheres here. So at the start of the animation, I want this ball here to be seen coming down to this point here. And then this ball, the top ball, is going to be taking over and then be animating down here. So I just need to make sure that the top ball is animating correctly. So it's animating in the right direction, and also that the rotation is correct as well. So I'm just going to come into the top ball control here, and there's two things I need to do. I need to reverse the keyframes on the position here. So if I just come down to frame 360, I'm going to make the position minus 100%. So it's going to be animating around the circle spline in the opposite direction. And also I'm going to come into the top ball here, and I need to do the same thing with the coordinates. I need to make the value on frame 360 positive. So I'm just going to omit the negative there and refresh this keyframe here. Just make sure I refresh the keyframe on the position there. Yes, I did. Okay, so now if I play this, and the top ball takes over the animation there. So what I want to do now is I need to set some keyframes for the scale just to hide these balls. So I know the bottom ball here. If I just come into search here, it'll be easier to see things. Okay, so I've got bottom ball and I've got top ball. So I'm going to do the bottom ball first, and I'm going to come into the coordinates, and in the scale, I'm going to select all of these. I'm going to set a keyframe for 1 because we want that ball to be seen. And I'm going to come down to frame 179. And I'm going to set another keyframe because we still want it to be seen. If I just move 1 frame forward, I'm going to set these values to 0. And set a keyframe. So now this ball moves down and the other ball takes over. So now the top ball I need to make invisible at the beginning. So I'm going to come to the top ball here, and these are all selected still. So I'm just going to change the value, hold down Control and Enter. Changes all the values there. I'm going to set a keyframe for 0. I'm going to come down to frame 179, and I'm going to set a keyframe for 0, and then I'm going to move forward 1 frame, change the value to 1, hold down Control and Enter, and set a keyframe. So now when this animates, it looks like we have 1 ball moving around our tubes there. And that's looking pretty smart. So that's basically it. So I'm just going to come to the default view here. just move this back a little bit and position this down here. Okay, so I'm just going to, I'll just come out of my search there. I'm going to create a couple of things here. So I'm just going to create a little base here just quickly. So I'm going to say I'm going to have a cylinder. If we just come to the top view, and this cylinder I'm going to call center, and come to the object, and I'm just going to increase the radius just so it's just falling short of our post there. So 19, I'm going to say 195, I think. No, 192. There you go, that's looking good. Rotational segments, I'm going to say 100. And I'm going to set the height to 10. So now I'm going to create a tube, and this tube I'm going to call outer rim. And then I'm just going to drop that underneath our center there. So I'm going to just increase the outer radius to something like that, and then the inner radius as well I'm going to increase so that we can see our post there. So I need to make this a little bit more. There you go, something like that. I think 208. And just add a little bit more thickness to it. Okay, that's looking good. And the rotational segments, I'm going to say 100. And that's looking good there. Okay, so I'm just going to add a fillet as well. I'm going to say fillet. I'm going to just say 2 centimeters. Doesn't really matter. It's up to you how you're going to design this. But I just want to neaten this up a little bit. And I'm going to make the outer rim a child of the center there. If I just come to the front view, I can see what I'm doing. So the outer rim I need to make 10 centimeters as well. That's way too big there. Okay, so now these are all aligned up here. So I'm just going to bring these down, say something like that, and then I'm going to add a plane, and I'm just going to bring that down so that it's just underneath our geometry there. And that's looking good. And if I just come to the default view again, and I'm just going to increase this plane just so it fills the whole scene. And I'm just going to take some geometry off. I don't need all that geometry on here. And that's looking good. I'm just going to take the work plane off, and now we have our scene. So that's fine, that's what we built this machine to do, but we can make this look a little bit more complex. So all we need to do, I'm just gonna hide the plane and the center here. Just drop that into another null, just hide that. So this ball machine here, the main null, I'm going to set some keyframes for that. So I'm just going to come to the coordinates, come to frame 0, and I'm going to set a keyframe on the H rotation, and I'm going to come down to frame 360, set a keyframe for 360, And I'm going to leave these as spline. I don't want to make them linear. I just want to make a bit more fluid motion here. So now we have something that looks a little bit more complex. I'm going to stop this tutorial here. It's up to you how you're going to design and build your machine. I'm not going to get into texturing and lighting. I just wanted to show you the technical side of building the machine and what to take into consideration. In my examples though, I used a simple Studio HDRI, and texturing I kept simple, maybe 3 or 4 materials, a specular, metallic and simple basic mats. So I'm going to leave the creative part up to yourselves. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you liked it then give it a big thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Hopefully what I've shown you today will help you in your future projects. If you like what you've seen, then please give this video a big thumbs up. Like, subscribe and tinker that notification bell so you don't miss out on future content. It will help the YouTube algorithm thingy help others find my content. Also, you can check out my latest experiments, concepts and dailies on Instagram at almostdailyrender. And as always, any feedback and questions, please leave them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you have any problems, I'll be glad to help. And while you're here, you can check out my other content. Thanks for watching, and I shall see you in the next video.